Hi, everybody. Dane here from Moving to Canada. And today we are going to be talking about what to expect in Canadian immigration for 2022. We're going to cover a bunch of topics. We're going to talk about Canada's immigration targets, existing backlogs of applications. We're going to talk about express entry, new NOC codes, IEC, COVID related restrictions, all of that sort of stuff. And joining us to go over what to expect is Deanne Akers-Lans, a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and founder of Canada Abroad, an immigration consultancy based in Ottawa, Ontario. That's Canada's capital city. So thank you so much for joining us today, Deanne.
Yeah, thanks for having me here for this, Dane. It's some exciting topics that we're going to go through.
Yeah, I mean, 2021 has been a very strange year for Canadian immigration, and it's going to influence 2022. So we've got some interesting stuff to cover. And Deanne has actually written a piece for the Moving to Canada website covering what to expect. I'll just screencast it for you there. If you want to read this article afterwards, you can check the link in the description. And look, if you guys are, you leave this video and you have questions or you want, personalized one-on-one guidance or assistance with your Canadian immigration process, consider booking a consultation with Deanne and her team at Canada Abroad. If you're interested in doing that, I'll put that link in the pinned comment and in the description as well. But let's jump right into the topics for today. We're going to start by talking about Canada's immigration targets for next year. Deanne, what can you tell us about Canada's immigration targets for 2022?
Well, the targets that they have set so far for 2022, they are higher than the last few years. So each year the targets are going up, which is positive. But there's a few unknowns. So this year, because there's been, quite a backlog as we've seen with COVID, it's going to be remain to be seen if they actually reach their 2021 targets. So if
Mm-hmm.
they don't, we might see them allocate, those missing spots to 2022, and they could end up increasing the targets for the year. So that's something that could definitely come into play and maybe help everything get back up to speed and back to normal in 2022.
Okay, great. And I've just pulled up Canada's immigration levels plan for our viewers, and I've just highlighted the targets here. For 2021, the target for permanent residents was for about 401,000 new PRs. For 2022, that's 411,000, but that's the number, Deanne, you're thinking might possibly increase if they have to redistribute candidates from this year?
Yeah, because when they look at these targets, what some people don't know is it's not counted by how many invitations to apply necessarily they handed out, but actually how
Mm,
many visas were issued this year. So even though maybe we saw so many invitations to apply, that doesn't directly translate to how many visas were issued. So that's why they might have to see how many visas actually got printed at the end of the day. And then some of that might get carried over and actually finalized in 2022. So the actual, number, instead of being 411,000, it might end up being higher depending on when those visas are actually processed.
right. That's a really good distinction to make. And, we're going to talk about the backlogs that exist here in a minute. But that's one reason why, the number of invitations, especially for this year, doesn't necessarily relate to the number of visas that were issued.
Yeah.
Just before we get into that, Deanne, could you break down, we're talking about this 411,000 new permanent residents next year. Where are those numbers coming from? Like, which programs and which channels are they coming through?
Yeah, so when we look at this number, it's for all programs. So we could split that up into family class, refugees, the economic classes. And when we say economic classes, that would be your federal skilled workers, provincial nominees. So if we're breaking it down even further, for express entry applicants, what they're looking at for next year is they want to get, it's about 110,000 people
Great.
issued through
Okay.
that stream. PNPs, it's just under 82,000. So they
Okay.
do distinct between the PNPs and then the express entry. And then
Okay.
family class is quite large. It's 103,000 or just over.
Okay.
So when we talk about those targets, people have to remember it's not just for express entry, it's for all of the different categories.
Right. That's really important to consider. But I do find it interesting, like the three groups you just mentioned, express entry, family class, and PNPs together, that makes up, nearly three quarters, 75% of all the new PRs for next year. So those those are three massive pools that we're drawing from.
Yeah.
Um, I also did just want to mention, these are just the permanent residents expected to come to Canada next year. What does that include, and what does that not include?
So with the permanent residents, it's not going to include people who are coming on study permits or work permits. So this is just people
Right.
who at the end of the day are actually getting issued with what we call the immigrant visa, and they actually will become permanent residents and get a permanent resident card. So this would be federal skilled worker, federal skilled trades, Canadian experience class, spouse and common law in Canada class, the family class, parents and grandparents.
Okay, right. So anyone who's coming with the intention to stay permanently, but that doesn't include international students, work permit holders, IEC people coming under working holiday, that
They're
sort
all
of
under
thing.
the temporary residence, so it's a different quota that we're going to look at altogether.
Great. Okay. And I'm just going to review one other important piece of news here related to the targets. This is a piece that we wrote about Canada's immigration targets for next year. And there is just an important quote from Canada's new immigration minister, that's Sean Fraser from my home province of Nova Scotia, who has sort of indicated in a few different times subtly that he is open to increasing the immigration targets in 2022 if he does deem that necessary, which leads us really well into the next topic here, which is Canada's immigration backlogs. And this may be one of the hindrances to increasing those targets. Deanne, what can you tell us about the state of Canada's immigration application processing and the existing backlogs right now?
Oof. To simplify, I'm going to say it's a mess. It's
Yeah,
not really
that's
what we want
sums
to
it up.
hear right now. So there is a massive backlog. With COVID, I know from the beginning they had issues with staffing because some of the processing is done in large facilities and people couldn't get into the building to work. So they had to scramble, to get people to work remotely. And then obviously security issues because of the
Hmm.
information that they're handling. Not everyone's been able to actually go back to work. So they're not working with a full capacity yet. So that's obviously affected the number of files that they could process in a year. And then also,
Right.
what came into effect was, as we saw, people who maybe had their immigrant visa issued couldn't actually cross the border. So they couldn't even land. So that
Right.
also made them, okay, well, we're not going to process these files right now because the people can't even travel. So, allocating resources to different things. So this has all resulted in a huge backlog of applications that still need to be processed. So if we look at the numbers, and this was as of July, because with their access to information requests, they're a little bit slow on
Hmm.
responding to this.
Hmm.
So it could be, a little bit outdated, but we had over 500,000 applications for permanent residency still sitting to be processed.
Okay.
Okay. And
Over 500,000.
yeah, and then when you look at what the immigration target is for the year, like the numbers, there's a bit of a problem there. There's more
Right.
applications than the quota. So that's why I said that they might carry the quota over to the next year just to cover that, to make sure they can actually finish processing all of the applications.
Okay.
Then,
Okay.
if we look at temporary residence applications, so these would be your international students, your work permits, your IEC, there's 748,000 applications sitting there.
Whew.
Okay.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, and then citizenship. So people, who've applied for citizenship, they've got their permanent residency, but they're trying to make that transition. There was almost 400,000 applications sitting in that backlog as well.
Okay. And I'm just looking at these numbers and adding them together. That's like 1.5
Yeah,
million,
they said it was
something like
around 1.8 million sitting, waiting to be processed.
1.8 million applications sitting waiting to be processed. So this is the big variable that's going to impact, what they're able to do in 2022. What do we know about like what's happening with this backlog and how they're trying to tackle it?
Well, they have done quite a bit of overtime. So some people have been investigating this and asking about the working hours. And between July and October, they really ramped up the overtime hours so that the workers who are able to access, the system, that they're working
Hmm.
overtime to try to tackle these applications and get the backlog cleaned out. So personally, the clients and the files that we've been dealing with, we've seen more movement in the last 6 weeks on applications than I've seen since, March of 2020.
Okay.
So that's been a big positive for us. We actually are seeing applications finalized, federal skilled workers finally getting their visas.
Okay, I mean that's very promising
Yeah.
because, like you said, those numbers, that 1.8 million, that's from an access to information request from July. So, I mean, obviously this is anecdotal, but if we're seeing movement on applications in the past 6 weeks, that does mean they might be able to get through a big chunk of this backlog and get back on track in 2022, right?
Yeah, I think, the immigration minister is really doing everything that he can to get things back on track for 2022 because they really need to clear out the backlog. We need to get new immigrants coming in
Hmm.
because immigration drives a lot of things with the Canadian economy. And we need those people to get into the country. So he is, it seems like, doing what he can with what he's got, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And just a number that I always find interesting is the ratio of working persons to retired persons in Canada. And I know the government loves to throw this around, but it's back in the 70s, there were 6 working people for every 1 retired person in the country. Now, at this time, there's 3 working people for every 1 retired person. And they're projecting in about 15 years it will go down to 2 working people for every 1 retired person. Canada is a country built with a huge, sort of socialized medical system, access to like other social services. It's all taxpayer funded.
Yeah.
So the government has a big economic incentive to
Yeah.
to raise the levels of immigration in order to meet its labor force needs and continue growing that economy long term.
Definitely.
Now, Deanne, the next topic is one that we get tons of questions about, and I know that you get tons of questions about this with your clients. It's express
Yes.
entry. And I know it's what to expect for express entry next year is closely tied to the backlogs, as that you just went over. What can you tell us about express entry next year?
Well, we'll quickly just kind of see what we saw this year so that people kind of know
Mm-hmm.
where we're going. So, with this year, we haven't seen a single draw that is either all category. So, that means it included federal skilled workers, federal skilled trades, Canadian experience
Right.
class, and provincial nominations. They've only done draws just for the Canadian experience class and provincial nominees. So, come 2022, as long as they have cleared out this immigration backlog, the federal skill draws will then resume. Because they have
Right.
basically acknowledged in some internal memos that they weren't picking federal skilled workers because they didn't have the capacity to process the new applications. They had to basically focus on the ones, those files, and then also with the TR to PR pathway, they made a huge promise and commitment with processing
Right.
those so quickly that they just didn't have the capacity to take on extra applications. So they weren't picking the federal skilled workers this year, which is unfortunate because they're punishing a lot of people who have put the time and effort to get their documents together and sit in the system. But
Mm-hmm.
come 2022, we're not sure what month, obviously, because it's going to depend on how quickly this backlog gets cleared out. But then the draws should go back to normal. But we just don't have a set date that we can actually give anybody about when those draws are going to come back.
Yeah, and this is something that has frustrated our readers over the course of the years. Just this sort of lack of transparency on the behalf of IRCC, and like you stated, Deanne, it's frustrating for people to have prepared all of these documents, to have done, for example, language tests that only are valid for a certain amount of
And
time,
they're
and then to not be considered for an entire year.
yeah,
And even now, as we're getting ready to go into 2022, IRCC has, well, that memo has been obtained stating, like, we'd like to get back to doing all program draws. It will happen when we get through some amount of the backlog. We're not going to say exactly how much, and we're not going to say how long that will take. So we're still lacking a lot of clarity there.
yeah, they're not transparent. I mean, and the frustrating thing was this year is it would have been nice if they had made that public so that people could
Hmm.
say,
Hmm.
well, great, I'm not going to spend my money right now to do my language test and have it expire a little bit quicker. I'll wait until 2022 to get my documents together for express entry. But they weren't transparent whatsoever. It's, all these access to information requests and internal memos that you need to get an idea what's going on. So, we would love also in 2022 to see a bit more transparency from them.
Exactly. It's exactly what my therapist says to me about being in a relationship. I'm supposed to communicate expectations and be transparent about what's going on, and that will make my relationship flourish. IRCC needs to
Yes,
follow
yes.
that advice with how it's dealing with immigration candidates. So beyond the backlogs and the question about when all program draws are going to resume, there are some other possible changes that we're anticipating for Express Entry next year. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, so what they mentioned a bit earlier this year when they were doing their budget for the year was they did mention and made it clear in a few different places that they're going to change the way that they're picking people from the express entry system. So what
Mm-hmm.
they noted was they are not getting the best candidates necessarily for Canada, and that they're going to have to change the way that they actually select people from the express entry system to make sure
Right.
that we are getting the best candidates for what the economy needs. So again, they haven't been transparent or no note so far on what is going to happen. But if you look
Mm-hmm.
at, the system in the past and the way that they pick people, two thoughts that have come to a lot of people's mind is either they're going to change the comprehensive ranking system scoring. So ideally, in a perfect world for me, what I think is they would change the points for age. That would be great,
Okay.
because what we have found is we're getting a lot of young people picked, but they don't necessarily have the work experience to take the positions that are opening up in Canada. Because with the aging
Right.
population, we need more of those middle and executive level people, but they need to have
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit of work experience, which your younger applicants don't necessarily have. So they could make changes such as, less points getting deducted for age or waiting until you're a bit older to start deducting points for age.
Okay.
That's one thing.
Great.
And the other is they could go back to what we saw with the federal skilled worker program before express entry. So this was where they
Okay.
had sort of set lists of occupations that were in demand in the country, and only people with experience in those occupation codes could apply. So we might see them either making a set list of acceptable occupations, or they could, like Saskatchewan, make a list of occupations that cannot apply.
Mm-hmm.
So we might see
Okay.
that coming into play in 2022.
Like an in-demand list or an excluded
Yeah,
list. That's great, and I mean those are two great hypotheses. Of course, as you mentioned, we'll only find out for sure in the months ahead.
yeah,
And sometimes immigration officials like to talk a big game, and then the changes they make are like really small.
exactly.
Like they
Yeah,
added 15 points for having a sibling in Canada, that sort of thing.
exactly.
So we will see, but one of the big changes that we do know is going to be coming next year is a change to the occupational classification system that Canada uses, the NOC codes. Here, and I'll pull up your article on this topic. Um, what can you tell us, like what's important to know about this NOC code change for 2022, and which immigration programs will be impacted by this?
Okay, so first thing that I think has caused some confusion for people is they're going to call it the NOC 2021, even though it's only going to come into effect in 2022. So if you are
Hmm.
seeing it, because it is available on the websites now, it is not in effect yet. So the new NOC
Right.
codes, we're not going to use these in the immigration system until they said about fall 2022. So just so
Okay.
people aren't panicking at the moment. But this is really important because the NOC codes are used for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Federal Skilled
Right.
Trades Program, the Canadian Experience Class. Because right
Okay.
now, when we look at it, every occupation in Canada, we break it up by skill level, and there's O, A, B, C, and D. But as we know, most immigration programs, only O, A, and B category occupations are eligible. Everything sort of at the C and D level, usually there has to be a specialized program. They're not usually used for immigration purposes. But
Right.
with the new system that's coming into play, they're going to get rid of the system that we know with the O, A, B, C, and D, and they're going to
Okay.
change it to something called a tier level. And there's
Okay.
going to be an extra level.
Mm.
And this extra level is going to kind of come in between B and C.
Okay. And I think I've put together a chart
Mm.
on this. We have a piece on the new NOC codes, and I'm just going to pull up this comparison chart. So you've mentioned the skill levels A, B, C, and D under the current system are going to be replaced by these 6 tier categories. And yeah, the number of categories doesn't align with the number of skill levels. So I think the big question there is like the ones in the middle, like B and C, what category they're going to become.
Yes. So they have given some numbers, but of course they don't say which codes. But basically, some of the B level could
Mm-hmm.
get put down to C, but then
Right.
also some of the C, depending on education and skill level, could get upgraded to that middle
Okay.
ground, right, between B and
Right.
C, because they've created that new category. But the problem is we don't know yet for specifically, this is really important for Canadian experience class and
Mm-hmm.
federal skilled worker, what levels they're going to accept.
Right. Okay. So which tier categories are going to be eligible for express entry is the unanswered question at this point, because if they do, I'm just going to scroll back up to the chart here. If they make only, tier category 0, 1, and 2
Yeah,
eligible, then a lot of the people at B who have been slotted down into that third category, they will no longer be eligible. Whereas if they open it up to 0, 1, 2, and 3,
mhm,
more people could become eligible. Is that right?
exactly. So this is, it's a lot of crazy terms being thrown out and
Yeah.
it's hard to keep up, but we really need, again, the government to give us some notice with this because you don't want to be working towards that 1 year of Canadian work experience to get through the Canadian experience class and you're in the B level and then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden they come out and say, oh, sorry, your occupation now is deemed too low.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would be
Okay.
nice if they, again, would give us some notice ahead of time and say, coming in 6 months' time, this is what's going to be in effect to kind of give some people time to transition and to make a plan. But as we know, they're not very transparent.
Yeah, and hopefully, again, we'll get more information about this sooner rather than later. As you mentioned, I'll just reiterate this: we don't expect these new NOC codes to come into effect until later in 2022, probably in the fall. So it's close to a year away, so we do still have some
Yeah.
time.
So on that note, I would just say to anybody who's watching, if you're eligible for the Canadian Experience class now, get your application in as soon as possible because things can change at any time
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to get caught off guard.
Yeah, especially if you're at one of those skill level B occupations. 0A, you should be
You should
you
be
should
fine.
be safe. But B, there's a little bit more of a question there. And the other thing to note here is, of course, these tier levels, the NOC codes, they don't just impact express entry. It's also a lot of work permits are tied to these. I know, like, if you're coming to work and you're in a skilled position and you're on a work permit, your spouse is then eligible to apply for an accompanying work permit, and that's maybe something that we have to assess, like which skill levels will be eligible for that accompanying work permit. Um,
Exactly, because right now it's the same thing. It's O, A, and B level occupations. If you're working in one of those, your spouse can have the open work permit. So depending which tier levels they say, your spouse may no longer be eligible for that open work permit. So it's going to impact a lot of families.
okay. Great. Well, hopefully we'll get more details on that soon, and you can trust us. Once we do have more information, we know that's going to be a big story, so we will be reporting it on the Moving to Canada website. The next topic that we did want to cover today is the Working Holiday Program and International Experience Canada for 2022. We at Moving to Canada have a lot of IEC participants. It's a hot topic for our users. So I'm just going to review some of the things that took place in the previous IEC season for 2021. And then, Deanne, I'll ask you to maybe talk about what we can expect for this upcoming year. Of course, 2021 was a really strange year for IEC as it was adapted to meet the needs of the pandemic. First, we saw the season launch delayed. Usually, IEC launches in late December or early January, and it was delayed until March this year. The second big change this year was a job offer requirement for working holiday participants. This has never been required before, but for the 2021 season, due to COVID, they required that working holiday participants had a job offer lined up before they could come to Canada, and before they could even receive an invitation, they had to submit that to the government. Now, that was actually lifted, that job offer requirement, in September, and replaced with a vaccination requirement. So if you were fully vaccinated, you didn't have to show your job offer in order to enter Canada. And the last thing is the number of invitations. Canada has these big quotas that it's negotiated with the countries that are eligible for IEC, and it didn't fill them this year. Massive numbers of spots were remaining at the end of the season. It's a logical decision considering the massive backlogs that they have in other areas. But I know people have been wondering what to expect about the quotas for next year. So, Deanne, with all of those things in mind for what we saw this year, what can people expect for IEC for 2022?
Well, I mean, going in, we'll start with maybe the positives.
Okay, great.
Is because the borders have reopened, you should still not require that job offer if you're going through the working holiday program. So it should be as it was, no job
Right.
offer required. But you definitely are going to have to be vaccinated. Coming into place for January, you're going to have to be vaccinated to get into the country. So that is going to be one of the major things that people need to keep in mind. If you're not vaccinated or not going to get vaccinated, you're probably not going to be able to get through on the IEC program.
Yeah.
The next thing is we don't know when it's going to reopen. So like you said, we would usually see it early in the new year. Are we going to see it on that timeline, or because of the backlog, are they going to make it March? That is the one thing that remains to be seen. I think the backlog is probably going to have an effect, and we are going to see it open a little bit later in the year, but they could surprise us. But that's my feeling at the moment. And then also the number of invitations. Like you said, we had quotas that were not filled again this year. And if we look at next year, there is the potential for them to increase the quotas, taking some of the allotment from this year and pushing it into the 2022. And the reason I think that could be looked at is because so many of the IEC workers, we know they work in hospitality. They're quite important to the Canadian economy, especially the tourism industry, your bigger cities. Everywhere you go right now, like restaurants, they're all hiring. They just don't have enough staff. We're seeing that constantly. So I think they really need to bring in these IEC workers to fill those positions, because notoriously that is where they're going. So it's quite possible they could increase those quotas for 2022.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And another big area that we see that is ski hills. We have tons of people who go to the ski hills at Whistler in BC, Banff in Alberta, and they're just unable to fill those positions for this year because they haven't been able to bring in people from Australia who love to come and work a ski season in Canada. Yeah, of course, we won't know for sure what to expect until the government announces is transparent. Classic refrain for this video. But I think you brought up a really good point about the backlogs. Like, Canada has paused its express entry draws for the most part, except for PNPs. And that's, a huge economic driver for permanent immigration. That's like a big immigration priority for Canada. If they've paused the express entry draws, it wouldn't be shocking if they paused the IEC draws until they were able to get their backlog under control. Because IEC, it is a lower priority for the government. It's temporary residence. It is for those work permit holders. Thank you, Deanne. I'm going to move on to the final topic here, which is COVID-related news for 2022. And I'll give a little overview here. I've pulled up the COVID news feed on the Moving to Canada website. This is a page that I keep updated for our website users, where we track all of the current travel restrictions, special COVID travel requirements, what you have to do if you want to enter Canada at this time. And before we get into this, I want to give the caveat that these requirements can change at any time. We're not even going to go into the detailed requirements in this video because they are in such flux, and we're recording this on, it's Tuesday, December 14th, 2021. There's all this news circulating about the new Omicron variant of COVID, and that could definitely impact Canada's travel restrictions. So I'm going to put a link to this news feed in the description. If you are intending to travel to Canada in the coming months, check this news feed because it will be updated with the latest travel requirements. But Deanne has alluded to the fact that one thing you can expect for 2022 are very stringent vaccination requirements. For people who are traveling to Canada. Over the course of the pandemic, Canada has had a number of exemptions for people who are able to travel to Canada. I'll pull up the list here. So you can see here, immediate family members of Canadian citizens, permanent residents, even temporary residents have been able to travel to Canada as long as they quarantined. IC participants, international students, you'll see there at the bottom of the list. They've all been able to enter Canada, but as of January 15th, that list is going to be greatly, greatly reduced. These people will only be able to enter Canada if they are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. There will still be a handful of exemptions for, COPR holders, for example, for certain types of in-demand occupations like agriculture and food processing workers. And for essential service providers, but for the most part, you're going to need to be fully vaccinated. And that will also impact what you're able to do while you're in Canada. There are a number of domestic restrictions in place. Most of Canada's provinces, or maybe all of them at this point, I would have to check that, have some sort of proof of vaccination requirement in place to access non-essential services like gyms, restaurants, bars, that sort of stuff. There are also domestic travel requirements in place. If you want to take a train or a plane in Canada, you need to show proof of vaccination. And another big one for foreign nationals, as of February 28th, as of the end of February 2022, if you want to board a flight that departs from Canada and goes internationally, goes to another country, back to your home country, for example, you need to show proof of vaccination. So you kind of are in this bind right now where you got to make a decision whether you want to stay in Canada or you want to get vaccinated, because as of February 28th, that requirement's going to come into place. So that's all that I'm going to cover for COVID for 2022. It's very up in the air. These things can change at any time, so I won't go into a ton of detail. For more information, check out the newsfeed. Deanne, do you have anything you'd like to add about what people should expect for how the pandemic will impact 2022?
I think it's just also, depending what country you're coming from, is making sure that you can access one of the accepted vaccines, because maybe, yeah, you are vaccinated, but it's not one of the one that Canada accepts. You're going to have to make a plan to maybe transit through a third country to get that vaccination done if you're coming after the deadline, or you need to get in before the deadline and get your vaccine in Canada, because a lot of people, unfortunately, their country is just not issuing the ones that we accept, and that is going to have a definite effect on them getting into the country.
Great. And I'll highlight, there are currently 7 vaccines that are accepted. I've highlighted them there in the article, but more vaccines could be added in the future, or Canada could even change the definition of fully vaccinated. People are really pushing the advantages of a third dose of a COVID vaccine for the new variant, so that the definition could be restricted to people with 3 doses. We really don't know. So just make sure you check the latest requirements if you're planning to travel.
Yeah.